About a year ago, we joined a group called Next Century Cities. And Next Century Cities, it says that their main mission is to support community leaders across the country as they seek to ensure that all have access to fast, affordable, and reliable internet. There's 118 member cities. The number grows weekly. And it's just a kind of a network for sharing information and support on just a wide variety of ways to try to get very high-speed internet in communities. Well, Chris is policy director and one of the founders of Next Century Cities, but he's also the director of the Community Broadband Network Initiative with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in Minneapolis. In his bio, it says on his day-to-day basis, he runs Muni Networks, a comprehensive online clearinghouse of information about community broadband. In 2012, he published 3 in-depth case studies of citywide publicly owned gigabit networks called Broadband at the Speed of Light. And in 2011, he released the Community Broadband Map, a comprehensive map of community-owned networks. He was honored in 2012 as one of the 2012 top 25 in the public sector technology by Government Technology, which honors doers, drivers, and dreamers in the nation each year. And also the National Association of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors, NATOA, if you've ever heard of that, named his organization in Minneapolis as the Broadband Organization of the Year. Chris earned a master's degree in public policy from the Hubert Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota, and a bachelor's degree in political science from Macalester College. Anyway, we were fortunate to have Chris available. He's heading off right after this to another engagement in Idaho, but with his expertise in this area, because this is a new area for you as a council to look into, I thought it'd be good to have an independent sort of a nationally recognized person who's very familiar with these issues to be here as a resource person. If you've got questions on different ways that cities enter into the broadband field, he's a great source of information. So I've asked Chris to share a little bit of the background, what's happening in broadband in various communities, but also wanted him to be here to answer any of your questions about it. Chris.
Thank you. And I'm going to try and speed through this because I think the questions are more interesting to me than laying out some of the background as I see it. It helps to explain a little bit. The Institute for Local Self-Reliance believes strongly in municipal ownership. And beyond that, believes cities should take a real strong role in essential infrastructure services, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Next Century Cities believes that cities should be taking charge, doing something, not necessarily owning the network themselves. So to some extent, I speak differently with different hats on, and you'll hear maybe a little bit of that today. But I want to congratulate you for, at the very least, getting interested in this, because we're seeing hundreds of cities around the United States have already taken action. I would believe many hundreds are in the midst of these sorts of discussions right now, and time will tell whether it hits the thousands or not. But this is not unlike the early years, decades of electrification. Things are happening more rapidly now because everything is sped up, but there as well, we saw cities that did it early, cities that did it more in the middle, and then cities that came on along at the end over many decades building their own electrical grids. So I wanted to start off with noting that as a policy person, I tend to think in terms of trade-offs. I think of things in terms of a continuum. So as we're asking questions, I'm not likely to just sort of come down and say this is the answer. I'm more likely to say these are the sorts of things that we see have been challenges with that approach, or these are the benefits we've seen. I've written often about municipalities that have struggled in building their own networks. I think it's very important that we recognize that some cities have not succeeded in this. We recognize why they struggled, and then we explore how we can make sure that we don't duplicate that. Something that I think we've done a pretty good job of in this movement. More than 20 years of cities building their own networks, we don't often see the same mistakes being made twice. So that is a success. Wanted to sort of, I'm a very technical person in some ways, and I like talking to non-technical people. So I like to start off by saying that I no longer have to tell anyone what a megabit is or what a kilobit is or any of that sort of thing. At this point, people are talking about a gig. And the useful thing to know about a gig is that it really doesn't matter what the ultimate speed is. The point of a gig is that it does what you need it to. The network will allow you to use whatever applications you want. And I think of this in terms of, with our electrical system, we don't have to turn off our lights in order to use the toaster or a hair dryer or that sort of thing. There's enough electricity coming into our house that we can pretty much be confident any device we bring home will work. That's what we're talking about with a gig. A gig is more capacity than you are likely to be able to use today, and that's fine. Their goal is not to figure out how to slow your network to a crawl. It's how to make sure that your kids aren't getting in the way of what you're doing, to make sure that if you're an entrepreneur, you have enough capacity to experiment and to be building the apps of the future. So that's about as technical as I plan on getting, frankly. And I think that the whole idea of the gig economy, gig networks, is very useful because it allows us to talk about this without having to be engineers. It allows a lot more people to talk about this substantively. Some of the things that we see in terms of talking about a gig, and some people might be asking, well, do we really need that much more capacity? Is cable and DSL enough? The answer we're finding is increasingly no. There's a variety of ways to make this point. Some have done it by doing studies of real estate and showing that there's a premium on real estate, and that's mentioned in the preparatory materials I know you've gone over already, some of those studies. We're now seeing that 4K video is going to become commonplace on the new iPhones. 4K video is very large. If you want to back that up, if you want to share that with other people, doing that over even a fast cable connection will be challenging because fast cable connections are designed to allow you to download much faster than you can upload. And historically, that's only really been a problem for small businesses, people who are photographers such as myself that want to back up, and those sorts of things. So it hasn't historically been as big of an issue for the average person, but with 4K video coming down and the cell phones, it's one of these apps where I think people are increasingly going to be asking, why is it taking me hours to upload something? It would only take me minutes to download. That's just something people are going to notice. We're seeing with cities, the idea of a gig, some people might say, well, we don't need to have a gig to every resident. And I think that there's some merit to that. The question is, in my mind, is if you do not have a gigabit available anywhere or on reasonable terms, there's a question as to how that will impact development. Will people be moving into your community or moving out on a net basis? And we see in rural areas already that very clearly those areas that have good high-quality internet access do much better than other areas. And I think we're going to start seeing this more and more with urban areas as well, as we see populations move around within urban areas, because people are asking real estate agents. And in fact, I know from this market, because I've worked extensively with Sandy, and we produced a video about Sandy, and we've talked to some real estate folks, and people are noticing whether or not they have access to a high-quality internet network or if they just have DSL or cable and a service that they consider to be subpar. And then finally, some of the other things we see with cities that have gotten into this is municipal efficiencies. Things you may not think about. The ability to say, you know what, we'd like to have a camera on that intersection, or we would like to have smart parking meters. We'd like to do this or that. The ability to have that infrastructure already, not have to go negotiate a rate, perhaps an inflated rate with whoever owns the telecom, can be a big deal. And I think we're going to see this more with whether it's utility applications or other applications that are going to be coming into commonplace existence, where it's useful to have telecom that to have an open access point that you can use to make sure that you have Wi-Fi available, those sorts of things. So because of this gig economy, of the importance of this divide that we're seeing between those who have the cable and DSL networks of the past, or even not even those high quality networks, but the difference between the communities that have a gig and those that don't, we're seeing some real concern. A lot of local governments are taking action. Some are building their own networks or making plans to. Some are partnering with others. Some are trying to make themselves attractive to Google, something that I know is going on in this market. And a point that's readily made by people in academia, people in the private sector, myself, is that cities have to do something. If you don't do anything, odds are you're going to have the same network you've had for a long time. The cable and telephone companies have been doing upgrades, typically in areas where they face competition. And if you do not have that competition, you're likely to be at the end of the upgrade cycle. And so local governments that take action have a much better chance of making sure they're going to have the better high-quality networks of the future. And in particular, if they build them themselves. One of the ways that we see this happening, and it's hard to say because I know that we're seeing more local governments that are considering building networks than at any other time, because we write every day on muninetworks.org, the site that you mentioned. We track what's happening with local governments. But the interesting thing that we found out yesterday is that Colorado is a state that requires local governments to get voter approval before any sort of telecommunications action. And thus far, Colorado has had 10, 12, something like that, local governments that have done that election. I believe all of them have passed it at this point. There was one that did not, and then later came back and did pass it, simple referendum. This November, there's at least 26 local governments that are going to put that on their ballot, and we believe when you count in the number of counties, there's going to be over 30. So this is the sort of thing where, as we're tracking down numbers, we are seeing local governments are getting more involved in this on a regular basis. So local governments are getting involved. The gigabit economy is important and does represent something substantively beyond what cable and DSL can do. Now the question, I think, is one of discussing, for instance, whether one would want to wait for Google Fiber or take action. And here I think it's a little bit of a more difficult decision. And Next Century Cities has a number of the cities that are working with Google in Next Century Cities. And so let me just say that you certainly have the capacity, if you would like to talk with some of them, we can certainly facilitate that through Next Century Cities. Same with cities that have built their own networks, cities that have negotiated with some of these different partners. One of the things that's handy about Next Century Cities is being able to talk with your colleagues about this sort of thing. One of the things that we've seen from Google, though, is that they make an announcement, and then there's a waiting period. You don't really know how long it's going to be. And I know in this market, people have been waiting in Portland and a number of the suburbs for a long time already to find out when that announcement will be. Once that announcement's made, there's another waiting period that is indefinite in terms of when they decide to begin deploying. Once they begin to start deploying, it's not clear where they would start, and they it's hard to say that they don't really take a lot of advisement or direction from local governments, when I believe that they are more collaborative with local governments than are the cable and telephone companies that we're used to. But still, Google makes up its own mind as they go along, as they see fit. So I think when a community has the option to do it itself, it makes a lot of sense to, at the very least, consider that possibility as strongly as possible. One of the things that comes to mind when I think about relying on Google is that if Google decides to get out of this business, the community has no say over who takes it over. And this is something we've seen in a number of markets with Frontier, where I believe, and Consumer Reports, if we just use them as the standard, would say that Frontier is a considerably worse provider than Verizon. When Verizon decided to sell its fiber network to Frontier, a lot of communities saw a substantial reduction in the quality of service. That's not something they had any say over. And that's the sort of thing that I think should be concerning to people that are making a decision that's going to have an impact for decades down the line. Communities are considering other kinds of partnerships, some along the lines of what's here. Some are directly partnering with an ISP like Ting. There's so many different models. I'm not going to go into them all, but fundamentally, we're seeing a lot of different approaches where local governments are taking on different levels of risk, or they're looking for different levels of rewards. Some communities are looking to diversify revenue down the road. Others are, and the majority are, looking to break even. They're not trying to increase revenue. They're just trying to have the service. They want to see property values go up, quality of life go up. They want to see more economic development. They want to have some security in the future pricing of the network, that sort of thing. And so that's their goal. With municipal models, we see a variety of approaches from citywide. Chattanooga is one of the most highly recognized. They've done a terrific job marketing themselves. Frankly, they do a lot of things very well. A lot of other municipalities do things very close to as well. They don't necessarily get the same recognition. But we've seen a lot of success in that. That also tends to be a higher risk approach. Some cities will say, we'd rather do it over 10 or 20 years because then there's very low financial risk and we're willing to have some people wait a long time to be connected. Longmont actually put that question to the voters and said we could do this over 30 years. And Longmont, Colorado said we could do it over 30 years, or we could do it over 4 or 5 years if you give us the authority. And they decided to do it quickly because a number of people recognized they did not want to have to wait while their neighbors had it, and they would have to wait another 5 or 10 years potentially to get it. I wanted to just close with a couple of comments about this region, because I think it's useful to recognize that these things, it's not just about technology. There's a lot of local differences. Sandy has been successful for a variety of reasons, and I think 3 are lessons that you should take under consideration, or at least recognize the assets that you have. Sandy can provide a lower cost, higher quality gigabit than a number of other places because it's hooked into NWACS, the Northwest. This is the problem with just writing down an acronym. The Northwest Access Exchange, Northwest, I'm sure. It's a place where everyone comes together with their networks to share traffic, and it works out wonderfully.
Yeah, yeah.
And that may be an A now that I think about it, but the point is that you have a collection of high-tech companies, a collection of various entities that come together to peer together in ways that communities around the country don't have access to that in their backyard. That means that your costs will be lower, your operating costs will be lower to deliver higher quality services. That's a pretty big deal. You have, you're tied into the Clackamas County, which helps you to get connections to that. Again, not everyone has that kind of regional connectivity that you have here. That's a tremendous asset. And then another point is that, and this is something I frankly don't know very much about, but personnel is very important. We have a chief technology officer here who I've just met. And there's the difference between some communities succeeding and not, I think, is the enthusiasm and interest of the city's either CIO or CTO. And I think that in Sandy, Joe Knapp has been terrific. And if the city did not have someone that was enthusiastic like that, they may not have had the same success that they have. The same is true as Santa Monica. You're a city without an electric utility, which puts you among a minority of communities that have moved forward historically. We're seeing many more communities now moving forward that do not have a municipal electric utility. But historically, it was cities that had that knowledge base. The cities that have been moving forward are those where they either have someone in-house or someone that they can call upon to work with. And having Sandy so close, and as I understand it, a possibility in terms of whatever approach you may move forward with, I think that that's an important point. Someone who's been there, who understands this, and who is very enthusiastic. Personnel matters in terms of making these things work over time. So that's those are some observations from the region. I'd love to answer any questions.